Where does LSU head football coach Brian Kelly rank in the hierarchy of SEC head coaches?
You are Locked On LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, y'all? Happy Tuesday. Welcome into Locked On LSU. Thank you for making us your first listen every single day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast. Plus, you can also check us out on YouTube as well. So subscribe to the Locked On LSU YouTube page, and you'll get notified as soon as new episodes of the podcast drop. All right, today's edition of Locked On LSU was brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers join today, and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. So visit FanDuel.com/locked on to get started. All right, let's get into it because when Nick Saban announced his retirement a few weeks ago, about a month or so ago, I knew that was going to shake so many things up within the conference, within college football as a whole. And we have seen that exact scenario play out. Nick Saban retires. Kalen DeBoer gets hired at Washington. So, of course, Washington then gets shaken up. Jed Fish, the head coach at Arizona, takes the job at Washington. So then Arizona gets shaken up. I mean, it sent seismic waves throughout all of college football because the best coach in the history of college football is now no longer part of it. But it also shakes up, I believe, the hierarchy amongst the way that we view head coaches in the SEC, because prior it was Nick Saban and it was Kirby Smart at the top. And then you have the coaches that you could view as the bottom, maybe the coaches that haven't been very successful, the coaches that haven't proven enough, or really the coaches that haven't proven anything at all. One coach that would fall into that category is probably Jeff Lebby at Mississippi State. He could be a fantastic coach. We just don't know because he hasn't done it yet. So it kind of falls into the unknown category. Clark Lee at Vanderbilt probably falls into that bottom category as well, simply because he just hasn't been very good at Vanderbilt. It's a tough place to play, a tough place to win. But kind of in the middle there was any given year could be a different ranking or a different perception of those head coaches. So where does Brian Kelly rank amongst the new hierarchy of SEC football? Now that Kalen DeBoer has taken over at Alabama, and now that Steve Sarkisian and Brent Venables have entered the conference. Now, what sparked this conversation for me was Connor O'Gara, a Saturday Down South. He did his own ranking of SEC coaches. Kirby Smart, number one. I don't think that there is any sort of justification that you could make to not put Kirby Smart not as just the number one coach in the SEC. He's the best coach in all of college football. I mean, there's three coaches now in college football, active head coaches that have won national championships. Dabo was one of them. I don't think there is any sort of argument that you could make that he's the best coach. Mac Brown is the other one. It's been almost 20 years since he won a national title. And Kirby Smart. Kirby Smart's the best coach in all of college football. So, of course, he's the best coach in the SEC. Per Connor O'Gara's list, he has Brian Kelly at number 2, ahead of Kalen DeBoer at 3, Lane Kiffin at 4, Steve Sarkisian at 5, Mark Stoops at 6, which I thought was kind of a shocker, Heupel at 7, Hugh Freeze at 8, Eli Drinkwitz at 9, and Mike Elko rounding out the top 10. So that led me to think, is Brian Kelly really the second best coach in the SEC? Is he the best coach outside of Kirby Smart, who won back-to-back national championships? So I thought about it. How would I rank it differently? If Brian Kelly isn't, and I'm not saying that he isn't, I just thought, let me think about it. Let me take my purple and gold tinted glasses off and really think about if I agree with Connor O'Gara or not. I broke it down into a few different things. That in order to be in contention for this number 2 spot behind Kirby Smart, you have to have done at least one of a few things. Won a championship. Well, no one outside of Kirby Smart right now in the league has done that. So the second thing is getting to a national championship or getting to a college football playoff. There are several coaches that fit that criteria, whether in the SEC or not. The other kind of criteria I looked at is 10-win seasons and getting to an SEC championship game. So there are only 10 coaches in the SEC right now who have 10-win seasons, either in the SEC or in their most recent stop. So Steve Sarkisian would be one of them because he's gotten to the college football playoff at Texas, won 10 games at Texas. But it really, because that's Kirby Smart, Brian Kelly, Kalen DeBoer, Steve Sarkisian, Lane Kiffin, Mark Stoops, Josh Heupel, Hugh Freeze, Eli Drinkwitz, and Brent Venables, who won 10 games at Oklahoma. But there is a pretty steep drop off, I believe, once you get to a Mark Stoops or a Hugh Freeze. That it seems like that top 5, those really are the best coaches in the SEC because those are the coaches that have either gotten their team to a conference championship, to the college football playoff. And I add Lane Kiffin in there because I think that winning 10 games for the first time in school history and doing it twice in 3 years, that's pretty impressive as well. When you break it down, I don't know really if there is an argument to make, and this is coming from as little as a biased place as I could possibly make it come from. I don't know what argument you would have to say that Kalen DeBoer or Sark or Lane Kiffin or Josh Heupel or Mark Stoops are better coaches than Brian Kelly, simply because those coaches have not done what Brian Kelly has done. Steve Sarkisian got his team to the college football playoff this past year. Steve Sarkisian still has not won a bowl game at Texas. Yeah, you win the Big 12 championship game, and absolutely. That's massive. Steve Sarkisian had a fantastic season this past year. Would Texas have gotten to the college football playoff had they played in the SEC and had an entirely SEC schedule rather than a Big 12 schedule? I don't know the answer to that. They beat Alabama earlier in the season, and that is a pretty darn big accomplishment given how many teams in this league struggled to do that even just one year, much less year in and year out. But what Sark has not done is done it on as a consistent basis as Brian Kelly has done it. The longevity of Brian Kelly, I think, has to go above Sark or Kalen DeBoer. Another one that got his team to the college football playoff, got his team to the national championship this past year. Everywhere Kalen DeBoer has gone, he has won. But again, the longevity of Brian Kelly and the speed with which he turned an LSU program around with a schedule like it has, with the roster that he took over. And Brian Kelly also has done more than Lane Kiffin has. To be in all fairness, Lane Kiffin has gotten to 2 New Year's Six bowls. That's something that Brian Kelly hasn't been able to do. But Brian Kelly has gotten to a conference championship game. That's not something that Lane Kiffin has been able to do. 1-1. Brian Kelly beat him in 22. Lane Kiffin beat him in 23. But again, it's the longevity. So yeah, I don't disagree. I do think that Brian Kelly is the second best head coach in the SEC. Now, what do you do with that? That's a different story. Are you able to leverage that into a college football playoff? Are you able to leverage that into a national championship? Now, that's the big question. Because longevity, yeah, that's great. Mac Brown has longevity. And Mac Brown won a national championship. He just hasn't done a whole lot of that since. But that's what Brian Kelly needs to do, is to continue to build upon what he built in his first 2 years. The winning 10 games in your first 2 years, yeah, that's an amazing accomplishment. But you have to do more than that, especially when you're at a program like LSU with the expectations as high as they are. This is, I think, is a fascinating argument. And look, nobody's right and nobody's wrong, unless you want to make an argument that Clark Lee is the second best head coach in the SEC. I mean, there's plenty of arguments that you could make for several different coaches across the league. Just look at what Brian Kelly has done for as long as of a period as he has done it. That's not something that any other coach in this league has been able to do or can say. All right, but coming up next, there are some changes in the LSU football front office. What do we make of it? What does it mean? We'll get into that after just a couple of words from our sponsors. All right, I want to tell you about FanDuel. Happy Super Bowl to all of those who celebrate from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So if you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday is all about scoring the best seat on the couch, grabbing your favorite football snacks, and placing some super bets. So one of my favorite things about Super Bowl Sunday is sometimes, if it's a regular Sunday, it's tough to get everybody together to watch the games. What I love about Super Bowl Sunday is that everybody is coming together. Everyone is watching the game at the same time. So whether you're with friends or you're following the conversation on social media, it just feels like everyone is kind of all in the same boat, all kind of doing the same thing. And it's also really fun whenever you're watching with friends to talk about the bets that you're going to place. One of my favorite Super Bowl bets has got to be Travis Kelce anytime touchdown score. Don't want to bet on the Chiefs? Fine. Christian McCaffrey anytime touchdown score. Those two have been electric for their respective teams. They've been touchdown machines all season long. FanDuel has so many ways for you to end the season with a dub or two or even three. And not only can you bet on who will win Super Bowl 58, but FanDuel also has bets for which players will score a touchdown, how many points will be scored, and so much more. So new customers join today and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Just visit fanduel.com/locked on to sign up. Again, that is fanduel.com/locked on. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, rolling along here, locked on LSU. Thank you for making us your first listen every single day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And also, we're part of the Locked On Network, your team every single day. Speaking of the Locked On Network, very exciting moves. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every single league. So go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Okay, so some personnel changes. So we learned last week Will Redmond, the director of player personnel for LSU, was leaving LSU to go to Auburn, and that's a big deal whenever somebody like that leaves the program, especially when the program has seen top 10, top 15 recruiting classes, top 10 transfer portal classes. Um, you never want to undermine the work that somebody in that kind of role does, even though you don't see it on a daily basis, even though you don't hear from them in press conferences, even though it might not be a name that you particularly recognize, and even if you cannot see the direct fruits of their labor. A coach, you can see the work that they're putting in. We see it every single Saturday. We can see it at practice. What you don't see is what the work of a front office person does, the groundwork that they might lay. And also remember that the job of a college football coach has never been harder than it is now. So all of the work that those front office people can do, whether it's on the recruiting trail or more on the CEO side of things, NIL, scheduling visits, so on and so forth, that's work that the coaches don't have to do because frankly, they simply don't have time for it. I mean, I don't know how college coaches have any time whatsoever to do all of the things that are expected of them. So don't underestimate the role of a director of player personnel or whatever title that they might have. So Will Redmond was incredibly important to this football program because you were having success and you were having success on the recruiting side of things. So he leaves LSU for Auburn. One name that we had heard early on in the process of the person that would replace him is Austin Thomas, who is was the Ole Miss chief of staff starting in 2022. He was at LSU in a couple different stints and bounced around several different places. He worked in the Les Miles era from 2013 to 2018 in a couple different roles: director of player personnel, football general manager. Then he went to Texas A&M and was the associate AD for football personnel, which I think is important. Not only was he working under Jimbo Fisher, was that also part of that stint was under Scott Woodward. Scott Woodward didn't come to LSU until 2019, so he would have worked with Scott Woodward for at least a year at Texas A&M. Served in a GM role at Baylor before coming back to LSU, before Coach O got fired, and then left for Ole Miss. Austin Thomas, it has been announced that he will make yet another return to LSU to fill in that role to serve as LSU's director of player personnel. So if you've been wondering why Lane Kiffin has been tweeting out a lot of things that are just basically just throwing shade at LSU, whether it's tweeting pictures of him watching the Ole Miss LSU game from this past year when he just randomly tweets out 7-11 because that's the number of yards that this LSU defense gave up. Because I know I was wondering, like, dude, like, what's the beef with LSU? Like, what, like, why LSU? Why are you singling out LSU? That is exactly why, because there was the groundwork being laid to get Austin Thomas, who is the Ole Miss football chief of staff, back at LSU. I think that this is a big deal. Austin Thomas is somebody that in the football world is incredibly well respected. And it is tough for me to be able to reiterate that sentiment simply because I don't know exactly what those people do. I don't know what their days might look like. I don't know exactly what is their job description because you can say that they oversee operations and they work hand in hand with the athletic director and with the football coach, but what exactly does that mean? Plays a really large role in recruiting because you're doing the recruiting board, that you're assisting the recruiting staff. You're essentially what we might know of as an NFL general manager, like what Mickey Loomis does for the New Orleans Saints. That I believe in job description is very similar to what Austin Thomas will be doing and what Will Redmond did do for LSU football. Another thing to remember is too, recruits and transfer portal players aren't necessarily going places because they're sold on the director of player personnel or they're sold on the football general manager. No, no, no. It's the coaches, it's the coordinators, it's the facilities. In some instances, it's proximity to home, it's the development for the next level, it's NIL money. All of those things absolutely are factors. But the foundation of those things are laid by the people in the front office of football ops. So I know it's tough for fans to get overly excited about a move like this one way or another, to be overly bummed when a Will Redmond leaves or be overly excited when an Austin Thomas comes back to LSU, simply because you do not see their work on a day-to-day basis, at least directly in front of you. Like, oh, I know that Austin Thomas is going to be responsible for these things, but every person that I've talked to and everything that I have heard, all of the intel that I have is this is a big deal. And Austin Thomas is the kind of person that you not only want to have on your side, he's not the kind of person that you want to be competing against and recruiting against. Think about it. Why is Lane Kiffin so jaded? Why does he feel the need to keep Twitter up and to keep his Twitter fingers going? I don't think he'd be so obviously upset about something if it wasn't a loss. So Austin Thomas coming back to LSU. Coming up next, a bit of a mixed bag today. Coming up next, LSU women's basketball loses their second game in a row for the first time since Kim Mulkey's first season as head basketball coach at LSU. What went wrong and what's the concern level? We'll get into that coming up next. All right, we come into the sports world just to escape some of the crazy realities of real life. I do it, you do it, we all do it. But let's just for 1 minute talk about preparing for real life. According to the FDA, pharmacies are running out of antibiotics like amoxicillin right in the middle of the worst flu season in over a decade. I mean, that is scary. And I can't imagine a more helpless feeling than if I or someone that I love, or I don't have kids, but I can only imagine how scary it is when your kids do get sick. And especially if that happens in a supply chain issue. And if that kept you from life saving medication that you or a loved one might need. Thankfully, we'll be okay because Jace Medical can help you out. They have a Jace case, which is a pack of 5 different antibiotics to treat a long list of bacterial illnesses, including UTIs, respiratory infections, sinusitis, skin infections, among many others. I mean, this could happen to any of us. This probably already has happened to a lot of us. So visit jacemedical.com and complete your physician encounter. It'll be reviewed by a board-certified physician, and your medications will be dispensed by a licensed pharmacy at a fraction of the regular cost. It has never been more important to be prepared than today. So go to jacemedical.com and use offer code LOCKEDON, LOCKEDON, to get $20 off of your order. All right, rolling along here, Locked On LSU. LSU women's basketball falls in Starkville 77-73. That is now back-to-back losses following the South Carolina loss at home earlier this past week. That's back-to-back losses for the first time since Kim Mulkey's first year as the head basketball coach at LSU. So what went wrong? What went wrong? First and foremost, it's what we've been talking about. It's what Kim Mulkey has talked about in nearly every single one of her media availabilities. And it's the defense. I mean, Mississippi State shot over 50% from the field. They had 53% pointers. I mean, you just simply cannot give up shots like that and expect to win ball games. I mean, they had 8 of their 13 3-pointers. Excuse me. 9 of their 17 3-pointers. You only hit 3 threes all night long. You're the number one offense in the country. How do you expect to put up points if the three just isn't working for you, especially against a team like Mississippi State that I think has been hot and cold and up and down over the last few weeks? The other thing that I continue to notice that really reared its ugly head last night, Hailey Van Lith is not in the right position. Hailey Van Lith was a shooting guard at Louisville. And Hailey Van Lith, really for the most part, carried that Louisville team. She was the focal point. She was the face of that program. She comes to LSU, fills in a point guard role, and that's just not her. It's just simply not working. Because I found myself so many times last night, and several times against South Carolina, that when you were on a gotta have it moment, and Hailey Van Lith had the ball in her hands, I found myself thinking, oh no, oh Lord. She just couldn't come up in those clutch moments. And I don't know if that's an indictment of Hailey Van Lith, and I don't know if that's an indictment of the position that this coaching staff is putting her in. I tend to lean it's most likely the latter. That the coaching staff just isn't putting her in the position to succeed, not in the position that this team needs her to be in. Because I saw it, I'm sure you've seen it too. It was a video that was going viral on Twitter last night when Kim Mulkey's drawing up a play on the clipboard, and Hailey Van Lith is looking at her like, what? Like, she looks very obviously confused. And that was in the last few seconds of the game when at certain points you're either trailing 6 or 3 or 4. They were trailing last few minutes or seconds of the game, got to have it moments. And your team is sitting there looking confused. And most notably, Hailey Van Lith is looking awfully confused. Well, that's not how you're able to execute in gotta have it moments. So that's the problem, is offensively, you simply could not get things moving. Defensively, you couldn't slow down what Mississippi State wanted to do. They wanted to just kill you with a 3. And they did that, really, for the most part. So what's the concern level? I am not going to hit the panic button because I still think that very much that LSU can be a national championship contending team, because we saw LSU maintain a double-digit lead against the number 1 team in the country, at least in the first half, against South Carolina. Now, they need to find ways to stay out of foul trouble, because once Angel Reese got that 4th foul, it was really just game over. They lost all momentum and lost all energy in the second half. So if you can stay out of foul trouble, and if you can just ratchet up the defense just slightly, and if you continue hitting baskets the way that you did against South Carolina, I don't see why you can't beat anyone in the country. But then you have clunkers, like we saw at Auburn, like we saw against Colorado at the beginning of the season, and like we saw last night in Starkville. That is a team that is disconnected. That is a team that looks to me at times to be operating as 5 individuals and not as 1 unit. And that's not consistent. Against South Carolina, I felt like they were firing on all cylinders. But last night, it fell flat. that nothing seemed to go their way. Nothing seemed to go in. And they just looked overall discombobulated. The season is not over. You have a long season ahead of you. You have a long SEC tournament. And once the NCAA tournament comes around, I mean, hey, crazy things happen. So the season's not over. But you cannot afford any more losses like that. Winning on the road in the SEC, it's tough. But if you are a national champion, if you're a team with national championship aspirations, you're going to have to find a way to win on the road, even against good teams. So, what this team needs to do is figure it out defensively. It's not fun or sexy to rebound or to play defense. No, it's not. And this is a team that they want to score, that they want to be in the limelight. And I don't see anything wrong with that. But there is a problem whenever you overlook defensive play simply to have your name in the headline. That simply cannot do. That simply cannot be. So for LSU wins basketball, it's tough. They obviously didn't take the South Carolina loss very well, but you get back. You host Florida later on this week. You get back into the win column before a tough game on the road at Vanderbilt against a Commodore team that's playing really, really well. That's going to do it for me today. Thank you for making Locked on LSU your first listen every single day. Mailbag Wednesday tomorrow. Get those questions, comments, concerns, all of the above, and you can comment them below on YouTube. You can also send them in on Twitter at Caroline Fenton1 or at Locked on LSU.